Tom
Shedeur
Brady has been
Sanders
called
didn't
the
just win
greatest
today's
quarterback to ever
competition.
play the game.
He annihilated
7 rings,
15
a
for
resume
50.
that will never
Perfect.
be matched.
Flawless.
And for 2 decades,
Undeniable.
his image was
Meanwhile,
spotless,
Dylan Gabriel
disciplined,
collapsed completely,
team first,
managing
and
just 3
universally
completions
respected.
on 18
But
attempts.
now,
His frustration
Brady's
mounting with
words
each
have
errant
created
throw
a
until
storm
teammates
that even
reportedly
his
stopped
legendary
watching.
reputation
This
can't
wasn't
escape.
routine practice
It started with
excellence.
something simple.
This represented
touchdown
complete paradigm
celebrations.
shift occurring in
Everybody
real time
knows them.
before shocked
They're one of the
observers.
most iconic
According
parts
to multiple
of
sources
football.
present during
From
today's
dances to hand gestures to choreographed routines.
Than a quarterback
For players,
doing his
especially quarterbacks, it's more than just 6 points. It's a way to show joy, personality, and connection with the fans.
But it's not about winning.
But when Brady was asked about them
the
recently,
NFL
he
offseason
didn't
is
just
unhinged
criticize
when
the
Tom
trend.
Brady,
He
the
went
walking
on the
embodiment
offensive.
of discipline,
Brady said
dynasty,
individual
and
touchdown
football
celebrations
values.
were rubbish.
Randomly pops
He
out of his
argued it's
media
all
cocoon to side-eye
self-promotion,
a
not winning
21-year-old
football.
rookie.
And he drew
not
a
just
line
any
between how
rookie.
he used to
Shedeur
celebrate
Sanders.
and how today's younger
him.
QBs do
The
it.
same Shedeur Sanders,
He claimed he
who
always
just lit
went
up
to
training
find his
camp,
linemen,
went viral
his
twice
teammates,
before breakfast,
the men in the
and became
trenches
the
who
most
made his
polarizing
success
figure
possible.
in Cleveland since
That was
LeBron
his
took his
style.
talent to South
For him,
Beach.
it was
If you're into the
always
real
about the
story
group,
and all the
not
messy
the
session,
spotlight.
The
But then,
atmosphere
things got
transformed
messy.
progressively with
Brady
each
singled
Sanders
out the
completion.
new wave of
First
quarterbacks,
3 passes
and
generated
fans
polite
noticed something
acknowledgement.
uncomfortable
Next 5
about who
sparked
he was
genuine
calling
excitement.
out.
Following
Shedeur
4
Sanders,
created
Deshaun
growing
Watson,
anticipation.
black
Final 3
quarterbacks who
produced
celebrate
something approaching
loudly,
spiritual
proudly,
awakening.
and
Wideouts
unapologetically.
reportedly clapping mid-route,
Suddenly,
knowing
what
balls would
started
arrive
as a point
perfectly
about
regardless
teamwork
of coverage.
began to
Defenders
feel like
dropping
something
heads,
else.
understanding
Another
futility
reminder
before plays
of how
concluded.
black players
One
are
veteran
so often
And if
held
you're
to
sticking
different
around to see
standards
how
in
this
the
Browns
NFL.
QB chaos
The
plays out,
backlash came fast.
And now, just when the
Was
Browns
Brady
quarterback
really
drama
just
couldn't get
critiquing
more chaotic,
celebrations?
here comes
Or
Tom
was
Brady,
this a veiled
unprompted,
attack
ice cold,
on the
and very
identity and
pointed,
expression
criticizing Shedeur's
black quarterbacks
individualism,
have fought to
questioning
make
the
part
depth
of the
their
modern
own
game?
mentorship, and basically
The comments
implying,
started as
"Kid,
old-school
you're
football
not acting
talk.
like someone I'd really
But
put
now,
my name on."
they have the
Wait,
NFL
what?
asking harder
Yeah,
questions
that
about
happened.
race,
Let's break
leadership,
this all the way down,
and what it
because
really
Brady's
means
words didn't
to
just
be a
land.
team player.
They echoed.
Before the
spark,
backlash spiraled,
Shedeur's now
Brady
iconic
was simply
Rolex
describing
Flex
a
celebration.
principle that
You've seen
guided
it.
him through
The
2
wristwatch
decades in
check,
the NFL.
the icy
For
stare
him,
into
it
the
was
camera,
never about the
swagger
camera,
levels,
the
so high
spotlight,
the grass
or an
started
end zone
wilting.
Cornerback
performance fit
supposedly
for
removed
social
helmet
media.
after Sanders'
It was
12th
about
completion,
finding the
telling
guys
position
who
coach,
made the moment
"Can't
possible.
cover perfect."
Brady explained
Don't misunderstand
that every
what
time he
transpired
threw a
today.
touchdown,
This
he
transcended
sprinted straight
statistical
to his
achievement
offensive
towards
linemen.
psychological
He
domination.
made sure
Gabriel's
they were the first
catastrophic
ones to
3 for
celebrate
18
with him.
performance
Why?
didn't merely represent
Because in his
poor
mind,
execution.
they deserved it
This
more than
embodied
anyone.
complete mental
They took the
disintegration
hits,
under pressure.
made the blocks,
Sources
and gave
describe
him the
visible
protection to
frustration,
stand in the pocket.
manifesting immediately
Without
after
them,
Sanders'
no
perfect
touchdown
sequence
happens.
concluded helmet spike.
Celebrating
By
with
10th errant
teammates
throw,
wasn't just
Gabriel
a
stood
nice
isolated.
gesture. It
Teammates
was,
consciously
to Brady,
avoiding interaction.
the only correct
Nobody
way to do
offering
it. He even
encouragement
argued
because
that
everyone
collective
recognized the
celebrations
truth.
were more
The competition
intimidating than
ended today.
flashy solo ones.
The mastery
When an
intensified
entire
during full
offense
team period.
charges
In an
down
interview,
to the end
when
zone
asked about how
together,
the next
it
generation of
creates
quarterbacks
unity
are
and
branding
sends a
themselves,
message.
Brady
It's
made a
not
very
one
thinly
player
veiled
scoring.
reference
It's
to
11
Shedeur's
guys
celebration,
overwhelming
and
you as
it
a
was far
unit.
from glowing.
For Brady,
when I see a
that
quarterback
was a
score
psychological
and
weapon.
immediately start dancing
Stronger,
on his own,
he believed,
yeah,
than
I
any
cringe a little.
dance, hand
The great
signal,
ones don't
or
flex by
choreographed
themselves.
move. On the
They go
surface,
hug the
it all
O-line.
sounds
They
admirable.
celebrate with their
it
team.
paints Brady
That's the
as
kind
the
of
ultimate
leadership
team
that
first
wins
leader,
games.
always lifting up his
Let's be real.
teammates and
That's
putting
not
the
subtle.
group's success
That's Brady
above
with a
personal
scalpel.
brand.
And then came
For
the
many
kicker.
fans,
When
this
asked about
matched
his
the
relationship
image they
with
had
Shedeur,
always seen of
Brady
him.
shifted tones
Disciplined,
entirely.
focused,
What was
centered
once
on
framed
winning
as a
at
budding
all
mentorship,
costs.
the GOAT
But
and
here's
the prodigy,
the problem.
suddenly
Once Brady
became
went
something a
beyond
little
painting
less
his own
friendly.
philosophy
I've
and
talked to a
started
lot of
taking
young
aim at how
quarterbacks.
others
Some
celebrated,
listen. Some just want the
especially
photo.
when
You
calling
can
out
always tell
quarterbacks
who's
who
really
express
learning
themselves
and who's just playing
differently.
a part.
The tone
Just
shifted.
playing a
Instead
part.
of sounding
Okay,
noble,
now we're
his
deep in the petty
team-centric
pool.
philosophy began
Because
to
while
sound
Brady
like
didn't name
judgment.
names, everyone
And
knows
judgment
who he's
is
talking
where
about.
controversy
Shedeur's
starts.
name has been everywhere.
Because when
Highlight
you
reels,
label other
debate shows,
players' joy
focus.
as wrong,
Weight transfers
you're not
generating
just telling your
velocity
story.
without
You're
hard
deciding
accounts revealing
whose
blitz
expression
intentions,
counts,
protection
and whose
adjustments,
doesn't.
neutralizing
Tom Brady
exotic
could have left
pressures,
it at explaining
route
how he
adjustments
celebrated
exploiting
touchdowns.
coverage
He could have
vulnerabilities.
framed it purely
Veteran
as a
safety
personal
John
philosophy
Johnson III
and moved on.
supposedly
But
told
instead,
teammates,
he crossed
"That's
the
not
line
rookie."
from philosophy
Kevin
to
Stefanski,
critique, and that's
previously
when things
resisted
started
toward
spiraling.
Sanders' ascension,
Brady
reportedly
dismissed the modern
demonstrated
wave of
unprecedented
end-zone
enthusiasm
celebrations
throughout today's
as nothing
practice.
more than
Sources
self-promotion.
described
Essentially
He
saying
specifically
that wasn't
pointed
real.
at quarterbacks
So now
doing
we have to ask the
six-shooter
question
gestures
nobody
and
wants to
celebratory
ask,
poses
was the
directed
Brady
at the
Shadur
crowd
mentorship
moves
a PR
popular
stunt
among
all
players
along?
who lean
Let's
into their
rewind.
personality
Earlier
as
this
much
year,
as their
Shadur
stats.
posted a now
For him,
famous photo
that
of him
didn't read
and
as
Tom
football
Brady,
joy.
an
It
invite-only
read as
quarterback
branding.
summit. The
And while he
caption,
didn't call out
"Always
names
learning from the
directly
best,"
every time,
it got
the implication
millions
was
of views.
obvious.
Commenters
He
lost their
referenced
minds.
players like
The
Shadur
next
Sanders
TB12.
and Deshaun
He's getting
Watson.
coached by the GOAT.
Quarterbacks
The
who
narrative
do
was
embrace
solid.
showmanship when
Shadur
they
was
score.
putting in the work,
Younger
learning
players,
from greatness,
black
and humbly
quarterbacks,
sharpening his
athletes
craft.
who understand
But
that
now,
in today's
Brady's
NFL,
calling that
fans
vibe
crave
into
not
question.
just touchdowns,
generating
but the
obvious
stories and the
dowel
swagger
logins,
that go with
body
them.
language screaming
Brady's delivery
acknowledgement
didn't
of
help.
undeniable
Instead
reality.
of sounding like
Most
an old
significantly,
veteran offering advice,
Stefanski supposedly
he came
pulled
across
Sanders
as
aside
dismissive,
following practice for
like he
extended
was looking
private
down
conversation.
on an entire
Sources
generation's
position
way of
nearby
expressing
claim
themselves.
hearing fragments, including
Words like
incredible
rubbish
command,
and wrong
exactly
way
what we need,
weren't neutral
and most
football
importantly,
critiques.
prepare like you're
They
starting
carried
Pittsburgh.
a tone of superiority
This represents
that
seismic
rubbed
shift
fans
from
the
previous
wrong
messaging,
way.
emphasizing
And almost
developmental
instantly,
timeline
the
and
critique
earning
felt
opportunities
personal.
gradually.
It wasn't
Today
just
changed
one
everything.
We're
quarterback's
starting to
philosophy
wonder, was it
versus
mentorship
another's.
or just
It was
marketing?
a statement about
And
how
here's where it
individuals
gets
should
juicy.
act, wrapped
This
in
isn't
the
just about
authority
Brady
of a
being
legend
salty
whose
over a
legacy
touchdown
casts
dance.
a massive shadow.
This is about legacy,
For longtime
culture,
Brady supporters,
control,
his comments
the old
sounded
guard
like
versus
tough
the
love.
new wave.
But for the
buttoned-up,
quarterbacks he was
post-game
describing
suit-wearing
and the
quarterbacks
fans
of
who
Brady's
connect
era
with them,
versus the
it
drifters,
felt like a
no
veiled
season,
put-down.
highlight-hungry
A dismissal
new
that
kids
said,
on the block.
your way of being
Because
yourself
let's not forget,
is less
Shadur
valuable
is
than
not
mine.
playing by the old
That
rules.
was the spark.
He's not waiting
what
his
Brady
turn.
may have seen as
He's
harmless
not deferring
authenticity
to veteran
quickly
structure.
turned into
He's
accusations
not toning
that
it down
he wasn't
for the
challenging
comfort
a
of his
style
coach.
of play.
He's showing
he
up
was
in
challenging
designer
an
fits,
entire
throwing
culture
dimes
within
in
the
camp,
NFL.
flexing like
and
a
that
star,
shift was
and
where
making it very
controversy
clear that his
stopped
time
being
is now.
avoidable.
And for someone
the
like
problem
Brady,
with Tom Brady's
who spent
comments
20
wasn't
years
just what he
perfecting
said.
the image
It
of
was who
humor.
he said it about and the
Collaboratively.
history behind
Genuine
those
energy.
words.
Receivers
By
maintaining
pointing at
distance
quarterbacks
after
like Shadur
incompletions
Sanders
they
and
couldn't
Deshaun
reach.
Watson,
Linemen
Brady didn't
avoiding
just critique
conversation
touchdown
following
dances.
blown
He
protections.
tapped into an
Coaches
uncomfortable
huddling
reality.
separately, discussing
Black
what everyone
quarterbacks are
witnessed yet
consistently
nobody wanted to
scrutinized
verbalize.
for behavior
The
that's
starting
celebrated
quarterback
in their
competition
white
ended
counterparts.
definitively today.
To younger players,
Veterans'
especially
reactions
black
particularly
QBs
revealing.
carving out
These
space in a
professionals
league that has
witnessed countless
historically
training camp
resisted their
battles throughout
rise.
careers.
End
They
zone
understand
celebrations
performance
aren't
variance,
just
recognize
fun.
temporary
They're statements
struggles,
of identity.
appreciate
They're
development
proof that the
requirements.
NFL isn't
Yet
just
sources
about
describe for
statistics.
15
It's
speaks
about
for
joy,
itself.
culture,
Amari
swagger,
Cooper
and
supposedly
connection with
approached
fans.
Sanders immediately
When
after
Brady
practice,
dismissed these
embracing
dances
him while
as rubbish
saying,
or
"That's
self-promotion,
my quarterback."
it didn't
Meanwhile,
land as
nobody
advice from a
approached
veteran.
Gabriel. Nobody
It landed as
grind,
another
and
example of
subtle
black
dominance?
athletes being
That probably
policed
feels
for
like
showing
whiplash.
personality.
So what does this say
Think about the
Brady?
contrasts.
Well, a few things.
Quarterbacks like Aaron
First,
Rodgers
it's a reminder
or Brett
that
Favre
even legends
were
get
praised
caught up
for their
in
fire,
generational
their
gatekeeping.
emotion, their
For a guy who
gunslinger
changed
bravado.
the NFL forever.
Brady himself
Brady's
was celebrated
criticism
for
of Shadur
screaming on the
reeks
sidelines
of that
and
old
pounding his
school
chest.
discomfort with
But
individuality.
when QBs
He's
like
essentially
Sanders or
saying,
Watson
"Act like
aim
us, or
imaginary
you're not
six
ready."
shooters after
But
scoring,
here's the thing.
suddenly
Brady
the
didn't come up
conversation
in the Nell
shifts.
era.
Arrogant.
He didn't have
Me
12
first.
million Instagram
Not about the
followers
team.
at 21.
This double
He
standard
wasn't the
is
son
nothing
of
new.
a global brand
Throughout
like
NFL
Deion
history,
Sanders.
black
Shadur's
athletes have had to
reality
walk
is
a
different.
finer line
He's not
between
just playing
confident leader
quarterback.
and
He's
selfish
managing a
showman.
personal empire.
Brady's comments,
And yeah,
whether
he's celebrating
intentional or
differently,
not,
but he's also
reignited that
producing.
tension for an
He's showing
entire
up, putting in the
generation of
work,
fans
and still
who are
finding
tired
time to
of seeing it
inspire an
repeat.
entire generation
It
of players
wasn't just about
who grew
football
up watching
anymore.
both Deion
It was
and Brady.
about representation.
So now, the football
It was
world's
about
divided.
who's allowed to
You've got the
dance,
Brady's right
celebrate,
crowd,
and
old heads,
express
coaches,
personality,
traditionalists,
and who
saying,
gets criticized
"This is
for
why
not
young
acting
quarterbacks flame
serious
out.
enough."
Too much flash.
That's
not
why
enough
outrage
fundamentals.
spread so
And then
quickly.
you've got the
Brady may have thought he
His
was upholding
insistence on
tradition,
Sanders
but to
starting
many,
previously
he
dismissed
was
as
reminding
ownership
everyone
overreach
that
gains
even the
credibility
greatest
through
quarterback
performance
of all
validation.
time
Front
isn't
office
immune to
executives who
reinforcing
privately
racial
questioned
double
fifth-round
standards.
investment now
And
recognize
once the
potential
backlash
generational
framed it
value.
this way,
Andrew
his
Berry,
words
general
weren't
manager
just seen as
previously supporting
outdated.
Gabriel,
They
manufactured
were seen as
bravado, but
divisive.
authentic confidence
To
earned through
understand why
execution.
Tom Brady's
Messages
comments
direct,
exploded into
specific,
such a
demanding,
big controversy,
I'll find
you have to look
Trust
beyond
me
just
completely.
him.
Teammates
This isn't the
responded
first
viscerally.
time black athletes
Routes
have been
crisper.
told to tone
Blocks
it down,
sustained
to
longer.
celebrate less,
Energy palpable.
or to
This
act a certain
intangible
way
quality
so they
separates
seem more
competent players
professional.
from franchise cornerstones.
It's a pattern
Gabriel's
that runs
leadership
through
evaporation
decades of sports
equally
history.
significant. Minimal
In the
sideline
NBA,
interaction.
Players like
Zero
Allen
communication
Iverson
with
were
receivers
criticized
between
not
series.
just for their game,
The confident
but for their
presence
fashion,
displayed throughout spring
tattoos,
practices,
and culture.
training camps early days.
In baseball,
Shadur's not
players
changing
from
for
Dominican
anyone, crew,
or Puerto Rican
fans,
backgrounds
players,
were
cultural
scolded for
commentators,
flipping their bats,
saying, "Let him
something
cook.
their white
He's built
counterparts
for this
were
moment."
rarely penalized
He's
for.
redefining leadership
And
on
in
his
the
own
NFL,
terms.
black
And you know who
quarterbacks
else
in
seems to have picked
particular
a
have
side?
long been painted
LeBron
differently.
James. Because the
Take Colin
conversation
Kaepernick.
spilled into
His
other
protest
athlete
during the
brands
national
fast,
anthem
and suddenly
was
LeBron's
vilified
being
to
lumped
the
in
point
again
he never got
as
another
the
job
symbol
in the
of
league.
self-promotion gone
Meanwhile,
too far.
white
Critics are
athletes
pointing
who
to
spoke
his
out on
Forever
political
King
issues
Nike commercial
were often
like it's a
framed
Greek
as
tragedy
brave
of ego,
or principled,
comparing it to
not
Muhammad
disruptive.
Ali's confident,
Cam
but
Newton
humorous
was
swagger.
dragged through
Let's
endless
talk about that
criticism
comparison
for his
for a
dabbing
second.
touchdown dances,
Muhammad Ali
accused of
invented
arrogance
the athlete
rather
promo
than
reel.
seen for what
the
they
man
were.
rhymed,
Moments
clowned,
of joy
and boasted his
and
way
fan
through
engagement.
racism,
Now compare
criticism,
that to
and
Tom
more.
Brady.
But here's the
Fiery
difference.
sideline
Ali was
tirades,
funny,
screaming at
self-aware,
coaches, pounding
intentionally
his chest
theatrical.
after a score.
He wasn't trying to convince you.
Those were
He was the
framed
GOAT.
as leadership,
He was daring you to
competitiveness,
say otherwise.
the mark of a winner.
LeBron's commercial?
The
Less
difference
joke,
isn't
more
subtle.
throne.
It's
And now,
systemic.
people are
So when
saying
Brady
Shadur's wrist
condemned
check
players
is the
like
next step
Shador
in
Sanders and
choose
Deshaun
sides based
Watson
on
for
performance,
being too
potential,
self-promotional,
appear technically
it wasn't
flawless.
just another
Footwork
football
resembles
opinion.
professional instruction
It echoed
video.
decades
Base
of coded
consistently
language
maintained
about how
regardless
black
of pocket
athletes
movement.
should
Shoulders
act.
squared toward
Fans
targets
and
throughout
analysts
throwing
quickly
motion.
connected the
Follow
dots.
through identical
His
every
words carried
repetition.
all the baggage of
These
the
mechanical
NFL's history
consistencies
of
typically
holding black
require years
quarterbacks
developing.
to different
Sanders
standards.
arrived possessing
And
them
that's
innately.
what made the backlash
Conversely,
so
Gabriel's
sharp.
film exposes
It wasn't
concerning
simply
regression.
that people disagreed.
Previously, reliable
It was
mechanics
that Brady's
abandoning
comments
him completely.
felt like a continuation
Lower body
of a
disconnecting
narrative
from
that
that
same
has limited,
evolution.
boxed
The move
in,
from
and
playful confidence
unfairly
to pure
judged
brand
players
theater.
of color
But
for
again,
generations.
let's be honest.
What
This is
Brady
the
framed
era
as a
of
debate
black
about
excellence
teamwork was
with
now
receipts.
being discussed
And
as a
Shadurr,
debate about
he's got
race.
M.
And
He's
once
not
that
just
conversation
flexing for the
starts,
cameras.
sports
He's
controversies
delivering.
always move
That
into
8
much
for
bigger
11,
territory than
3-touchdown
touchdowns
camp
and
day.
trophies.
That happened.
At its core,
His leadership
this
moments?
controversy isn't just
Documented.
about individual
His college
players.
track record?
It's about what
Undeniable.
the NFL
So if
expects
he
its
wants to
quarterbacks
dance,
to represent
let the kid dance.
and how that
And Brady?
definition is shifting.
Maybe it's time to
For
realize
decades,
that mentorship
the quarterback
in
was the
2025
poster
doesn't
boy
look
for
like
tradition,
it did in 2001.
calm,
Because
stoic,
here's the twist.
professional. The
Shadurr
face of the
did learn
franchise
from Brady.
wasn't supposed to be
You can see it
flashy,
in his
loud,
footwork,
or controversial.
His poise, his
Think
command
Joe
of the
Montana,
offense.
Peyton Manning,
He might
and
not
yes,
celebrate
Tom
like
Brady
Tom.
himself.
He might not
They
dress like
embodied
Tom,
a very
but he's got the
specific
discipline,
image,
the drive,
controlled,
the vision of
team-first
someone
leaders
who's been taking
who kept
notes.
the celebration
So what if his wrist
inside
check
the huddle.
isn't
But
Brady
today's
approved?
game is different.
It's still working.
Younger
And while
quarterbacks,
Brady's off
especially
throwing
black
indirect shade,
quarterbacks, are
Shadur's out
tapping
here
into the
climbing the
entertainment
depth chart,
side of football.
winning over the locker room.
They're scoring
and
touchdowns,
carrying the weight of a
firing
franchise
imaginary
that desperately
pistols,
needs
dancing,
a new identity.
hyping up crowds.
Film reveals
and
truth
fans
brutally.
love it.
Performance
These
differentials, this
celebrations
dramatic
don't just
demand
mark 6
acknowledgement.
points. They're part of the
Stefanski's
brand,
post-game media
part of the
availability should
connection
prove
to a
fascinating.
social media-driven
How does he explain
fan base.
Gabriel's struggles?
That
How does he
difference in
acknowledge
philosophy
Sanders'
is
perfection
what makes
without
Brady's
declaring
words
competition
sting.
concluded?
He
How does
represents
he
the
navigate
old
ownership
guard, a
expectations,
league that
locker
told
room
players
dynamics,
to act like
media
you've been
scrutiny
there.
simultaneously?
Sanders,
Today
Deshaun,
transformed
Lamar
manageable
Jackson, and
situation
others
into immediate
represent
crisis.
the new NFL.
Special
A
teamers
league where
spreading
the
word
joy
about
of scoring
Sanders'
is
brilliance.
broadcast
Strength
instantly
coaches
to
sharing
millions,
observations
and
with anyone
authenticity
listening.
matters
The entire
as
building
much as
buzzing with
production.
recognition that something
It's a
special
culture
occurred.
clash, and
Not
Brady
routine
stepped
practice
right into the
excellence,
middle
but
of it.
generational
To
talent
him,
announcing
those
arrival
celebrations look like
emphatically.
ego.
The
To
psychological
younger players,
impact cannot
they
be
look like
overstated.
personality.
Gabriel
To
entered today
fans,
holding
they're
slim
part of why they
advantage based on
watch.
experience,
The raw
draft
emotion
position,
turned
coaching
into
preference.
something memorable.
That advantage
The question
evaporated
is,
completely.
which
How does
version of
someone
the
recover
NFL
from
does
3
the
for
league
80
itself
when
want?
opponent goes
The
perfect?
disciplined,
Where does
buttoned-up
confidence
past,
regenerate after
or
such
the
devastating
expressive
comparison?
player-first future?
At the end of the day,
Brady's
the game's
misstep
changing.
was assuming the
the
past
quarterback
still
position
defined
is
the
evolving.
present.
And if
In
Brady's
reality,
legacy taught
the
us
game has
anything,
already
it's this:
moved on.
adapt
Team
or get left
celebrations
behind.
and
So
personal
maybe instead
swagger
of
aren't
questioning
destroying
Shadur's
football.
authenticity,
They're
Brady should take a look in
redefining
the
it.
mirror and ask,
And when you pit
what's
those
more
two
important,
visions against
that
each
they
other,
celebrate
the
the right
quarterback
way,
as
or
company
that they
man
win?
versus
Because
the quarterback
Shadur's
as
trying to do
cultural
both.
icon, you
And if
don't just get
Cleveland
a
lets him,
debate.
he just
You
might.
get a full-blown
You know what's
generational
fascinating?
divide.
For all the noise,
If Tom
all the
Brady
whispers
thought his
about
comments
mentorship
would be
and
seen as
respect
harmless,
and doing it the right
old-school
way,
advice,
nobody's
he
asking the most
miscalculated
obvious,
badly.
most blisteringly
What he intended
important
as a
question
lesson
in this
about
entire
humility
saga.
and teamwork
What if Shadurr
instantly
Sanders
turned
is
into a
already better
storyline
at
about
being
double
a modern
standards,
quarterback
race,
than Tom
and
Brady
tone
ever was.
deafness in modern
Yeah, I said it.
sports.
Let's all take a deep
Why
breath,
did it
unclench
backfire
the
so
pearls,
hard?
and sit
Because
with that for a
context
second.
matters.
Because that
Brady
might just
wasn't
be the
speaking
real
as just
reason
any
Brady's
retired
comments
player.
stung the way they did.
He was speaking
See,
as
this
the
whole mess
quarterback,
isn't just
the
about
GOAT,
a touchdown
the face
celebration.
of NFL
It's not
tradition
about a
for
wrist check
over
or an
20
interview
years.
quote,
When
or
he
even
tells
whether
younger
Shadur
players
calls
how
Brady
they should
sir
act,
when they text.
it doesn't come
That's
across
surface
as
stuff.
opinion.
The real issue?
It comes across
Shadur
as a
represents
rulebook,
a future
a
that Brady
judgment,
can't control.
almost
He's
an attempt to
everything the league
control how
is becoming,
today's athletes
and maybe
express
everything
themselves
Brady's not
without
ready to admit
recognizing
it needs.
the generational
Let's break
or
it down.
cultural cultural shifts
Brady's
at play
career was
to
built
make
on
things
system
worse.
discipline,
The
pocket
names he
perfection,
referenced weren't
and
random.
Patriot-grade emotional
Critics
suppression.
immediately noticed
You
that
didn't see
pointing to
Brady
Shedeur
dancing.
Sanders and
You didn't
Deshaun
see him
Watson
flashing
wasn't
Sanders'
just about
completion.
flashy quarterbacks.
Players tweeting cryptically
Those
about
examples
witnessing greatness.
spotlighted young
Local
black
media abandoning
QBs,
practice.
which only
The narrative
amplified the
shifted
sense
completely
that
within
Brady
hours.
was
Sanders
reinforcing
transformed
old
from
racial
controversial
stereotypes.
fifth-round pick into
Fans
Cleveland's
asked,
obvious future.
why not mention
Gabriel
Aaron
relegated
Rodgers'
from
belt
presumptive
celebration
starter toward
or
trade
Brett
candidate.
Favre's
This
fist-pumping
situation impacts
theatrics?
everything moving
Why
forward.
only call out players
Preseason
who
game
look
planning
and act
changes
different
dramatically.
from him?
First-team
Whether
repetition
Brady
distribution
intended it or
requires
not,
adjustment.
the
Media
optics were
obligations
brutal.
demand reconsideration.
His team-first
Locker room
message
dynamics
lost
shift
all
permanently.
credibility
Veterans
because
aligned
it
with
sounded
perceived
like he
winner.
was dismissing
Young players follow
individuality,
veteran lead.
joy,
Coaches
and
adapt
cultural
messaging
expression
accordingly.
unique to
Front
a new
office
wave of
recalculates
players.
roster construction.
Instead of coming
Ownership
across
sees
as
validation
wise,
finally.
he came
Pulls
across as
definitively.
bitter.
Does
The
he honor
retired
stated
legend
philosophy by starting
criticizing the
Sanders,
next generation
or does
for
he
daring
expose
to be
hypocrisy
different?
by
And
continuing
that's why
Gabriel
his words
favoritism despite
exploded.
evidence? The
Not
decision
because
impacts
fans hate
credibility
Brady,
permanently.
but because
Players
they saw
remember
a crack
jewelry.
in the GOAT
He didn't
image,
take GQ
a
photos
man
in
whose
camp
commentary
or run
felt
side hustles
outdated,
from the locker room.
exclusive,
The man
and
lived off the
insensitive
mantra.
to the bigger
Head
conversation
down,
happening
mouth
in
shut,
football
let the
today.
rings talk.
In
But
the
guess
end,
what?
Brady's
That
misstep
era
wasn't just
is over.
in what he said,
Today's
but in
quarterbacks
failing
don't
to
just throw
realize
spirals.
how much weight his
They
words
build
carry.
empires.
And how
They're
quickly
content
they could
creators,
reinforce the
brand
very
managers,
inequalities the
social
NFL
icons.
has been
They're
struggling
judged
to
by
address.
both QBR and
The
their
reaction
ability
to Tom
sell
Brady's
out a
comments
sneaker
was
collab.
immediate and
Shedeur
intense.
understands that.
What started as
Not
a
because
casual
he's
interview
arrogant,
quickly
but because he's
snowballed
aware.
into headline
He
fodder,
knows that his
angry
value
think
to a
pieces,
franchise
and
isn't
social
just in
media
his arm.
frenzy.
It's in his presence.
For a player who spent his
poise,
entire
his
career
ability to
carefully
galvanize
managing
a
his
city
image,
that's been
this was
football
new
starved
territory.
for decades.
Brady
And
was
let's be
no
real,
longer seen
Cleveland
as the
hasn't had
spotless
this kind of
ambassador of the
energy
league.
around a quarterback
He was
since
suddenly
before
the
Twitter
face
existed.
of a
So
controversy
when Tom
he
Brady
probably
critiques
never
Shedeur's
intended
public
to
image,
ignite.
he's not just
Fans
offering
erupted
football
online.
wisdom.
Some
He's
agreed with
challenging
Brady,
the entire
praising him
blueprint.
for reminding
He's
young
saying,
athletes
"Play like
that
me.
football
Win
has
like me.
always been about
Be
team
humble like
over
me."
ego.
But here's
But
the
that
kicker.
group was quickly
Shedeur
drowned
isn't
out
trying
by
to be
those
Brady.
who felt
He's
his
trying
words
to be
carried a
Shedeur
dangerous
Sanders.
undertone.
And honestly,
Critics
that
accused
should
him of
terrify
targeting
every
Shedeur
old school
Sanders
coach and
and
commentator
Deshaun Watson
still clinging
unfairly,
to 2003
framing their
like it's gospel.
celebrations as reckless
Because what we're
self-promotion
witnessing isn't
rather than
just a
acknowledging them
generational
as
divide.
cultural
With
expression.
performance maintained.
The conversation
Gabriel's
stopped
third
being
round
about
investment
entertainment
becomes sunk
and
cost,
started being
potentially
about
requiring
inequity.
mitigation.
Players and
Roster
analysts
construction
weren't
assumptions
shy
require
either.
adjustment.
Several former
Salary cap
athletes
allocation
pointed out the
shifts based on
hypocrisy.
quarterback timeline.
Brady was
These
always
decisions
celebrated
impact
for his
multiple
fire.
seasons
Yet
beyond
when
current
younger
year.
black quarterbacks show the
Browns
same
fans
energy,
deserve
it's
recognition for
branded as
patience
selfish.
throughout dysfunction.
Others
They've
argued
endured
his
decades
stance
of quarterback
simply
instability.
proved he was out
Today
of touch
provided
with
glimpse
what
of
the
potential
modern
stability,
NFL has become.
excellence, excitement.
Even current
Sanders
players chimed
represents
in
hope for
subtly,
consistent
some
competence,
posting
previously
celebratory
absent.
dances online
His perfect
with
performance
captions
didn't
like,
just win
"This
practice.
one's for the
It
team,"
captured
mocking
imagination
the
of
very
fans.
narrative Brady
full-blown
had
culture
pushed.
clash.
The
On one
backlash
side, you
became
got the
less about
tradition crowd,
football mechanics
guys like Brady,
and more
who
about
believe
symbolism.
that quarterbacks should
Who
be
controls
extensions
the
of the coach,
culture of the
not
NFL,
personalities of their own.
and who gets
They
to
see
decide
celebrations
what
as
leadership looks like.
distractions, social
For
media
Brady,
as
the
liabilities,
hit wasn't
and
to his Hall of
self-expression
Fame resume.
as something to be
That
suppressed
remains untouched
until you've earned it.
but to his
On the
legacy
other
off
side,
the field.
you've got the new
He'd
breed,
always been
quarterbacks
considered the
who
gold
walk in the
standard
building
for
with endorsements
professionalism.
already lined up.
Now, for the
Guys
first
who
time,
command attention
fans were
before they
openly
even take a
questioning
snap,
if his
who know
ideals
that
aligned
leadership
with the
looks different
values
now,
of an
that it
increasingly
means
diverse
authenticity,
league.
not conformity.
And that's
Shedeur's
the irony
not
of this
trying to
entire
prove
fallout.
He can be like
Brady
someone.
was
Coaches
trying to
who
preach
prioritize
unity, but
politics
his
over
choice of
performance.
words ended
They
up
respect
creating
leaders.
division.
Defensive system implications
Tom Brady
prove
wanted to make a
equally
point about
fascinating.
teamwork.
Van Pelt designed
But instead of
scheme emphasizing
reinforcing
timing,
unity,
precision,
his comments
anticipation.
exposed the fault lines
Sanders
tearing across
demonstrated
the
mastery
NFL
of all
today.
three today.
What
His
seemed
ability
like
to throw
harmless advice
receivers
about
open,
celebrating
manipulate
with teammates
coverage through eyes,
became something
deliver balls
much
before
bigger.
breaks occurred.
A
These
reminder of how the
represent
league
system-perfect
still
execution.
struggles with questions
Gabriel's
of
struggles
race,
suggest system
individuality,
incompatibility
and what
or by
truly
pressure-induced
means to be a
dysfunction.
leader.
Either
The GOAT
explanation
of his era,
favors Sanders'
Brady
starting.
came from a time when
Running backs
quarterbacks were
particularly
expected to be
excited
the
about
silent
Sanders'
face of the
emergence.
franchise.
His play action
Stoic under
effectiveness,
pressure,
screen game
emotion
timing,
bottled
check
up,
down awareness
except for
create
the occasional
opportunities
fist
for their
bump.
involvement. Nick
Younger
Chubb
players,
reportedly approached
especially
Sanders
black
after
quarterbacks,
practice.
are
Rare
rewriting that
acknowledgement from
expectation.
typically reserved superstar.
For them,
Jerome Ford
celebrations are
celebrated
more than
openly
highlight
after
reel
catching
antics.
Sanders' wheel route
Their
perfectly
pride,
placed over
culture,
linebacker.
and
The skill
connection with
position
fans.
players
The
recognize
clash
which
between
quarterback
those two
maximizes
visions
their potential.
is why Brady's comments
Defensive
got
players'
so much
perspectives
heat.
prove most
To his
telling.
supporters,
They competed
he was
against
just
both
defending
quarterbacks throughout
tradition.
camp. They
But to
understand
critics,
relative difficulty
he was knocking
defending
down
each.
the very
Multi-
progress
control
younger athletes
of
have
his
fought
image.
for.
his
the
preparation,
right to be
his
fully
teammates,
themselves on the
moment
biggest stage
he
in
walks
sports.
like a vet, talks
Here
like
lies
a leader,
the irony.
plays like
Brady's
a star,
success
and that
was built
scares
on
people,
winning,
especially
but
the
this
ones who spent
wasn't
20
a win.
years telling us
By
you had
failing
to
to
be quiet,
recognize how
boring,
deeply
and
layered
borderline
his
robotic
words
to
were,
win in this league.
he turned a
But the
personal
NFL is
philosophy
evolving
into a flashpoint
fast.
conversation
It's not just
the league
about arm
couldn't
strength
ignore.
or IQ anymore.
So what happens
It's
now?
about presence,
Brady's
command,
resume won't change.
cultural impact.
His rings don't
And Shadur,
vanish.
he
But
checks
the way
every box.
people see his voice,
The Brady remarks,
that
while
might be
coded
different.
in that classic humble
Football
warrior
isn't
language,
just football
aren't
anymore.
really about team
It reflects the
celebrations.
culture that
They're
surrounds
about
it.
control.
And
They're
culture
about
always
reminding the new
evolves.
generation that
The
there's
real
a right
question
way to lead.
isn't whether
And
Tom
it just
Brady
so
was
happens
right
to look
or wrong.
exactly like Tom Brady.
It's this.
But maybe,
Can the
just
NFL
maybe, there's
finally
another way.
embrace
A way where
individuality
leadership
from
isn't
all its
scripted
players
joy,
equally?
where
Or will old
confidence isn't
standards keep
mistaken
holding
for
the game
selfishness?
back?